called them classics because they're classics for some of us, but there's a lot of people that had to go kind of get up to speed on collaboration technologies. I'm personally a believer that people are better off using the product they know more fully than trying to adopt new ones, particularly in the midst of trying to do something. So there's a lot of cool technologies I get a chance to see, but I'm in the same boat, Raj. I mean, I'm kind of living on Microsoft Teams these days. For the sake of the group, Teams has synchronous collaboration features like this, being like video, meaning everybody is doing it at the same time. And then there's asynchronous features, which are like the Teams channels, where, you know, if I'm collaborating with Raj and Lindsay and Christina, I might post something, I might create a document, they come by later and make a comment, and everybody gets to do it when it's best for them. I was a big Slack user before Herman Miller deployed Microsoft Teams, and I don't know if you all saw it, but there was something like a 70% increase in the use of Teams in the first 3 weeks of quarantine. So even I was kind of like, all right, I got to transition from the platform that I know. And if you've never used Slack, it's very similar to the channel features within Teams. It's very asynchronous. Great for distributed teams. I was running a project over the course of the last year where one of our team members was in Sweden, one was in Beirut, 2 were in Mexico, and 3 were in the US. And when you're dealing with all those time zones, it's tough to get everybody on meetings. And of course, video fatigue is real. So the situation you described, Raj, where like you're on video all day long, I don't know about you, but I can't sustain that. Like I'll start to get lightheaded, or I'll start to say stupid things, which is a great excuse for when I say stupid things. But for me, I've been really pleased to see, like at Herman Miller, the shift happening from lots of video to a little bit more interaction asynchronously. Even this morning, I had a call where we were talking about some really important things that we want to kind of research in the future. And my request was, can everybody think about it before our call? Then the call was only 30 minutes, and everybody had come kind of prepared, as opposed to hopping on a call and saying, let's all think together, which is kind of what I was noticing right after quarantine started. There was this great piece from the CEO of Automatic on Medium around the 5 stages of remote working, and stage 2 was basically you're trying to replicate everything you're doing in the office on video. Boy, that gets old quickly. So I'm pleased to see that at least for us, we're moving past it. I should also note, because I'm friends with Raj, and I got a chance to meet him as soon as he joined, that the 2 of us are not exactly introverts as far as sharing. So if you have a question or a thought, you should really not hesitate. That includes you, Lindsay. You know us.
Absolutely. The Lindsay and Christina were kind of telling us that you guys are not going to have a problem filling half an hour of dialogue here. So, you know, and I will say another thing to just sort of set the stage for the rest of this conversation. You know, we distilled it down to sort of 3 key questions around collaboration that Christina is going to ask. But you know, there's a lot of ground to cover, and we could go down a rabbit hole for half an hour just on one topic. So, you know, there's a lot of different directions we might go, and if you've got questions that take us in a different direction, that's fine too. I did want to just tag on to something that Ryan mentioned about using the technology that you're comfortable with. There's a really interesting article that I read last week about, you know, this acronym BYOD, about bring your own device. You know, there's a big movement towards recruiting and hiring, and you know, pretty soon here in the near future, as you're hiring new people will come with their devices that they're comfortable with. Also bring your own meeting, meaning that they will use the tools that they're comfortable using. You know, with Jeremy a few months ago when we first dove into this, we were questioning ourselves, are we going to go to Teams? Are we going to go to Zoom, GoToMeeting? We were looking at these things before the pandemic even hit. So I think moving into the future, it'll be interesting that part of your compensation plan might be, here's X amount of money for your laptop and your device, and you pick from this menu, which collaboration software do you want to use? The pricing model behind these is very much designed by user. So, you might have Ryan and I working in the same cubicle next to each other, but he's using Teams every day and I'm using Zoom. And so there's a different experience.
I mean, most of these have gone to a freemium model, meaning bring your own software, and it could be anything you want to use is now a reality for a lot of IT organizations. It's creating challenges because, you know, we might each find something that we really find useful. I've noticed this at Herman lately around brainstorming, and I just posted a piece to LinkedIn around what it takes to virtually brainstorm. There are tools you can use to capture ideas. One of my colleagues loves Mural, which is kind of like a digital whiteboard. Oh, Lindsay likes it too. I got to tell you, I don't mind it, but I love Trello, which is like basically virtual Post-it notes. And this is just going to increase, and it creates all sorts of challenges for IT organizations from a security standpoint, from a pricing standpoint, if somebody starts putting this on their corporate card. But the big challenge is like teams need to say, okay, everyone, I know we've all got our favorites. Let's land on something, at least for an initiative, because you can't have parallel paths. And when it comes to platforms like Slack and Teams, where the conversation lives for months, like you can go back and you can see what everybody was talking about on a certain topic a month ago and get up to speed. Having multiple platforms at use is it's really tough. So that's part of our challenge as organizations is I think everybody should experiment, find some new things, but then someone's got to say, okay, for this initiative or for this department or for this company, this is what we're going to use as our standard. Otherwise, it's just the wild, wild west.
I think that's a good point that Ryan made about keeping the same platform. Has anyone else experienced that when you go from one meeting to the next meeting to the next meeting, you just feel like your life is so fragmented? And so going back into the notes from the meeting before, just quickly before you get into that meeting is really helpful. So that's, I personally like Teams for most of those things. But the other reason, so Ryan was mentioning Mural. It is a sticky noting program, but it also, the reason that I like it, that I use the whiteboarding feature in Teams and the sticky note feature in Teams, so much of our life is process driven. And without being able to get together and think about sort of what's happening in the map of the world, it's very hard for us to say, oh, I can help there, or we need to fill that gap there, or we could do better here, without a lot of people being able to visualize it. And so I happen to love, and Nicole is probably laughing in the background, how much I love sticky notes and Microsoft Teams digital sticky notes now, because we're no longer finding as much value in the end product. A lot of value that we're all bringing to the table, and we all know this as we are, you know, the consultant here, one of us is the manufacturer here, one of us is the designer here. We're finding value across that stream. And if we can all get aligned on that stream, then we're all moving in the same direction in this cohesive manner. And you go, I can't do my next project without that person. I want them here because they fill that gap. So I'm seeing more and more that that economy, we're all starting to get into our spots and see, oh my goodness, you provide value there. Can I get on this? So I'm loving the Microsoft Teams and process-driven design aspect of it, just being able to visualize that. So that's where I am with it.
Yeah, you know, one thing we should keep in mind is as each of us becomes more comfortable with a platform, we will advocate for its use for others. And that's kind of a challenge. And anytime I ask someone to use a new product, I create an environment for them to play before doing like the real thing. So like I have in Microsoft Teams a dummy channel that is called Project Blackbriar because I love the Jason Bourne movies, and there's all of this stuff, and I'll say, I'm adding you to Blackbriar. I want you to post a GIF. I want you to create a document, because the trouble is if you join Mural or Trello or Teams, and it's like the real thing, if you play, you screw it up, and it's high risk. But if you look at how we adopt technologies in our personal lives, we just kind of goof around with them a little bit until we're comfortable, and we either ditch them or we say, okay, I'm comfortable with this. So if any of us are in a position to say to our teammates or our employees, hey, I'd like you to begin using this, I think it's dangerous to have somebody do it right in the midst of like, they've got a customer presentation tomorrow. No way. Like play with it for a week, get comfortable, then let's try a customer presentation with it. Yeah,
Ryan, over here at Bialek, I mean, same exact thing. When I joined the group, you know, I was sort of at the onset a team of one in this digital technology role, and as we rolled out Teams, it's hard to use collaboration technology and test it if you don't have a team, you know, to test it. So we set up this, you know, trial test digital team internally. I'm gonna have to come up with a better brand for it, like you did with your Jason Bourne theme. But yeah, you've got to do this to understand what's there and what's not. just one other thing that I wanted to add about Mural, Trello, even the whiteboard piece. That's the interesting thing about digital collaboration. I think the main tools right now are still more digital communication tools, whereas collaboration, it's a whole different ballgame, especially for all of us that are in this commercial real estate design field, and being able to collaborate on drawings and plans and documents. That's the next level of stuff. Not that it isn't already here, but really making that user-friendly, super intuitive. Autodesk has their cloud products. Bluebeam's out there too, to share and kind of mark up. But things like Whiteboard, as simple as Whiteboard is with Teams. I mean, it allows you to upload a PDF, a PowerPoint. It's a wide open canvas. You can just take turns sketching on it and noodling through stuff. I think that's what I'm excited about, seeing the progression of that technology advance.
And I think also too, for me personally, my trajectory of learning new technologies during this time has been like really condensed, and you have to get on board and learn new tools, whether it's, even as simple as editing a PDF to send back and collaborating, or, within Teams and setting up different groups and file sharing and all of that. It's been imperative to learn all these new technologies during this time. I know that we've recently kind of dug into Matterport and doing some virtual reality technology and tools using that, as well as Julio. So that's been a really interesting way that we have to still maintain presenting to our clients and showing content, during a time where we can't do showroom tours and things like that. I know a lot of other real estate people are using those types of technologies as well. So I guess, that being said, Raj and Ryan, where do you see this all headed with all these new technologies and kind of experimenting with different ways of collaborating? Where do you see this going as we continue down this path?
Yeah, I can share a few thoughts. And where my mind goes is that we're in an interesting situation right now where the vast majority of people are using collaboration technologies individually from their own device and usually from their home. And in some ways, that's an ideal situation. That's actually what Microsoft and Slack and others designed for. It gets more complicated when you've got some people co-located. Actually, it gets a lot more complicated. And it used to be that if you were the group in the room and then there was somebody who was calling in, that person was at a severe disadvantage. And I think we're going to see a little bit of a shift here, actually. If people continue to take video calls individually, including from the office, which I think is likely, then being part of that group that's together may pose other challenges. I just had some coworkers that were part of a Teams meeting, and they were in a conference room together, and they said everybody got their own box except for us. We were sharing a box, and we were tiny because we were spread out physically distancing. And I just think the patterns that we've learned are unlikely to be reversed. So I actually think this is a weird statement, but if you look at the overall collaborative process, you'll see more moments being done individually, which is an unusual thought. But if you think about like creating a document together, I might spend a couple hours creating it. Raj and Lindsay might come in separately. It's collaborative, but it's not necessarily synchronous. And so it's going to change probably the way we seek out better individual space. I think it's going to change the ways that groups work across distance. And the thing that I'm most interested in is to see if remote hiring practices increase. If we start seeing organizations say, well, I've always hired from DC, but you know what? I'm going to go get a few folks from other places. Maybe there's 2 or 3 in Boston or London. Then it's just going to massively accelerate the process even further because of what I talked about before. Time zones and being distributed will just remind everyone and almost force everyone to say, well, we can't just get in a room together to collaborate like we once did. For those of us in the real estate and workplace world, we're going to have to maybe shift away from that old perception that collaboration is a bunch of people in a room or in an open space. It's far more dynamic than that. And if we find that people are empowered even if they're not distributed, to choose when they come into the office, like there's no longer an expectation you have to be in every day, but maybe you come in 2 or 3 days a week, then the assumption will always be that when you try to work together, someone's not going to be there. And so I guess it's good that we've been learning these behaviors, but I kind of think we're just in the early stages of it. That's my take.
You know, Brian, I was going to add to that, you know, my wife, who's worked for CBRE for 6 years now, some of this isn't new really to organizations of that size. I mean, to your point, she had 6 projects at the same time, one in Phoenix, one in LA, one in New York, different time zones. Scheduling meetings was just, you know, I mean, really difficult. She's on the clock, you know, 12 hours a day, off and on. Where I think this is headed, and what's the big shift, is that kind of collaboration and the scope of that, maybe even for Herman Miller's of the, you know, a global business, that kind of collaboration is going to come down to just mid-sized firms. You know, this hybrid environment. If you are hiring remotely to different time zones, I mean, I think that's just going to become more commonplace for a company of somebody like Bialek's size. We're about 65 some odd people, but I think you're going to see that level of skill and knowledge trickling down to just smaller sized firms. It's not just going to be the JLL, CBREs, you know.
Well, and then you'll eclipse the big ones because you're far more agile. Well, and actually, I've made a habit of studying entirely remote companies for years. Not that I think that most companies should be, but if you look at 37 Signals or Automatic or Envision, these companies that were started with no physical facilities, it's interesting to see how they work. Most of them have far more agility and ability to work that way when they're smaller. It's tough when there's 1,000 people distributed around the world. So I think you're right, Raj, and I think in some ways those small to mid-sized companies could potentially outpace the larger ones very quickly in terms of these practices.
Well, hopefully there'll be some of the innovators in the world too, you know. I mean, that's what we're striving to be, you know, and we're the right size kind of company, you know, with the right talent and to be honest, the right diversity. You know, our business is maybe a small company, but it's a complicated business here that you've got sales and marketing, design, project management, accounting. You've got all these different markets, different you know, tasks and departments that are working differently, and to be able to stitch solutions together that not only help that team all work together, but with their clients and the way that they work. You know, we're going to have to be looking at everything that's out there and innovating, you know, custom ways of how to do it really well. You know, another just interesting thing, I'm going to really rewind back 20 some odd years. It was something that struck my mind this morning, which I think talks about this question. You know, I'm a registered architect. And for those that don't know me, I mean, I come from the commercial real estate world. I was in that business for 18 years. I met Lisa and Winona throughout my past over at DBI. And, you know, I can remember even before that working for a CAD reseller when this AutoCAD thing revolutionized the industry. And to look back on that and think how transformative that was. And you don't really see it, you don't feel it happening at the time. You know, how many companies were using AutoCAD? We still had some engineers that maybe weren't on AutoCAD at the time. And that transition took a while. I mean, it took 6 to 10 years maybe for it to really become pervasive. I was in the middle of all that through the 90s. I think now what you're going to see is similar to something that Christina opened up with, that things are going to change and become so much more commonplace, just like what's happened in the past 5 months. I mean, we're all familiar with how to mute and unmute ourselves in Zoom and how to launch Zoom and how to use Teams, and how we all know how to do this. And so within a year, you're going to see 5 years worth of kind of transformation really happen within a year. I think that's going to be the really interesting thing, is to just keep pace with all that.
I think one of the things that's also interesting is a lot of the tools in the architectural and engineering industries were about helping people visualize space or make decisions or just come together. And now these days, with the use of VR and the ability to have a virtual meeting as an avatar inside a space, I know this team is familiar with that. We've already put it out there for a client to say, you know, we show you your space on paper or even digitally or fly you through it. We want to be in your space with you. And so the way that people make decisions and visualize in those friction spots where we had before, where there was this disconnect between future and present, are now coming away because you can now experience that 4D future space and make decisions in the present space. So it's providing a really different way for people that to make decisions and move things forward as well.
You know, Lindsay, I mean, there's no doubt that the AR, VR visualization piece is going to be, you know, how we went from drafting to AutoCAD to Revit to BIM collaboration in the cloud, and now taking that into virtual reality, augmented reality, those tools that are out there. I really think it's going to be just the trajectory of not only the development of that technology, but the adoption of it is really going to be a fascinating thing to stay in touch with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So how do you, so is that, speaking about collaboration, collaborating in the future, do you think it's all going to go virtual, or, do you think it'll be a combination of, meeting in the built environment as well as technology? Like, where do you see this headed? Or, how's that going to affect collaboration in the future?
Well, I'm going to say one key sentence, Ryan, then I'll give it to you, only because I really love this that I came across a few days ago. For management level folks, anybody really, but to really recruit great managers, the ability to toggle or shift between virtual and physical, and just the ability to adapt in those two different environments is going to be a really interesting skill set to see people
I love that. That's a great point. I actually think in some ways maintaining like that virtual culture and helping teams stay together is a bit of an inclusion challenge. And I do think that part of being a good inclusive manager in the future is stitching together those that are co-located and those that aren't. I think necessity will force us to assume, as I mentioned before, that people aren't going to be together. But I do think there's a ton of value in being together. We have to shift our narrative a little bit around it. I think the industry, if I can use workplace as an industry broadly, landed on a narrative 10 or 15 years ago that you need a physical environment to collaborate. And I don't think that's true. I think you can collaborate very effectively without a physical space, but that doesn't mean the physical space isn't important. It's important for different reasons, and I think we're challenged to express it in a way that maybe a CFO or a CEO finds to be like a good, legitimate business case. But we have primary networks of people that we collaborate with on a weekly basis, and then there's that extended network, what sociologists would call your weak ties. That extended network is enormously important for the way people learn, the way they feel part of a culture, the way that they grow. And technology, for all of its benefits, has not connected us with our extended work networks very well. It's done a good job of taking those 20 people that you're going to talk to each week. But the physical space, if I go back as an example to organizations that don't have offices, they still get their people together regularly, usually quarterly, for some sort of immersive experience to build the culture and build relationships and build ties. And so I don't think we're going to go that far with most organizations, but I think if you just look at the natural evolution of things, the collaborative processes will continue to be supported virtually, and that the physical spaces will be all about strengthening the culture, strengthening relationships, exposing people to people outside their primary networks to grow. And if we just do a gut check and we say to most people, if you had complete autonomy over your work experience, would you work from home 100% of the time? Most people would say no. If you ask, would you go into the office every single day and have your butt in a seat by 8? No. In fact, Gallup has done research over the years. They just put out a piece in January about this. They suggest the optimal level of engagement happens when people are in the office, say 2 or 3 days a week. It just goes to show that people will find value in the space and they'll be there. I just don't know that we're going to get to the point where we say the space is an essential for collaboration. It's more of an essential for the culture. It's more of an essential to help grow the networks, the social structures that allows us to be productive. But can we get the next great client presentation done without being in the office? Probably.
And Ryan, back to the industry that we're in here, in our furniture industry, and as a designer, I mean, the physical environment, those are some things that are going to change. When you remember video teleconferencing happening in your conference room, everybody got excited that you're able to do that. Having that more prevalent throughout office space design, having furniture systems that work with that, or maybe flexible to adapt to that kind of scenario, because you're going to have a teammate meeting and 3 folks are not in the office, but being able to design an office that's sort of a little bit more fluid and adaptable to that kind of collaboration, I think there's going to be some interesting spaces that come out of that dialogue that become more commonplace, and furniture types, to accommodate that. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to mention something that we talked about when we were kind of brainstorming last week, and something that I've been hearing in several different forums is just the idea of trust. Trusting your employee trusting you, believing in your colleagues and your team that everyone's going to accomplish, their particular task without physically being in the space, and knowing that, okay, Raj, you're doing this, Lindsay, you're doing that, let's get back together the next day or two. And everyone's worked on the project, and then you're coming together and really collaborating as a team, but just having that trust factor.
Yeah, the culture piece is a very large part of the coming together now. Our team yesterday did a workshop on reciprocity, and the piece is because it's really hard to be vulnerable in this kind of a forum, in the little box, and the new leadership that's coming out is really more about empathy and how are you bringing your full human self to work. The Andy Owen of Herman Miller or the Jacinda Ardern's of the world, and it's really more about bringing how we bring our whole selves to this situation. And so when we have to think about culture, we were thinking, the reason we went to reciprocity is, how do we create a safe space where people can ask for help? And not just within our team, but within our clients and within our industry. Because when we give enough space to have them feel vulnerable to ask for help, it's actually when we can provide the most value, when we know this is what you need help with, and we can narrow in on that and say, we can absolutely help you there. But if we don't set the stage for that, we don't get there as quickly or as easily. And so this digital world needs to sort of have a balance between the humanity and the tech, where the humanity is, it's not being lost, but it really needs to be intentionally celebrated and brought forward.
Well, and there's a strong business case for making that happen. I don't know that most CEOs are realizing it quite yet. But if let's just say we see a 20% increase in the number of jobs on LinkedIn that are posted as remote, and any of us find that we have a bunch of job opportunities, in this case, outside of DC or outside of Grand Rapids where I live, what's keeping us? We either feel like we're valued, we have a sense of belonging, and we have this affinity for the organization we work with, or we don't. And so sometimes I know that at Herman Miller, the way we think about work and work experience can feel a little fuzzy, but the reality is if people feel a lack of belonging, a lack of trust, they'll go somewhere else. And so we're beginning to see a little bit of that already, even in Silicon Valley, where some of those organizations have begun to hire more remotely, and they're a little surprised that they're seeing some people not stick with the organization, because if I live in a city and this company is the main player, but now I don't have to necessarily work for them, then it changes the way that we perceive our employers. There's also a downside too, which is if those jobs are posted remotely, there's a lot more competition for that role at lower wages. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but right now those dynamics haven't fully gotten into effect because the economy is soft and most people aren't hiring a bunch. But once we see a more of a fight for remote talent, these softer things in terms of, are we encouraging trust? Are we building relationships? Are we building the culture? Do people feel connected to the brand? Will be the key determinants, along with your relationship with your manager, in terms of whether or not you stay or go.
And Ryan, and in some sense, the remote talent, I mean, that's not really new. You know, even at Bialek, we've got a few key great players who have been at the company a long time, and they're very valuable to the organization, but they actually don't live in the DC area. You know, so it's not like that's even new. I just think, again, coming back to how those kinds of things that happened were occurring with larger firms, I think all that's just going to be so much more prevalent for the mid-sized design firm or accounting firm, and you'll just see more and more of that.
Yeah, it's definitely not
because the capability exists.
It was just viewed as an exception, right? It was a privilege. So you had to be given some sort of permission to work in a remote location, and you probably didn't know the tools. And, you know, we've blown the doors off both those. West Monroe Partners, which is a consultancy, just did a study of CEOs of billion-dollar companies and over, asking them of all the things that are going to change post-COVID-19 about your business, what do you think is going to be the most significant change? And they talked about supply chain structures and business continuity and financial management. Number one answer was our remote hiring practices, or our remote work practices, excuse me. So I think we're back to that principle we stated before, which is whatever was naturally evolving just skipped ahead about five or 10 years. By the way, I could keep talking for like 4 hours. If we're supposed to be wrapping up at any point, somebody just tell me. I'll just go. I'm like an Energizer bunny. Close your eyes.
We might need a timer or a clock ticking, you know, like a odometer kind of here while we're talking. Brian, to your point, gosh, what was I going to say? Remote hiring practices. I think that's just going to be so impactful. And the key here is that when we're looking for answers, I think I mentioned this to Kathy before the session even started, you know, there's not a one size fits all, you know, because people are in different businesses and they've got different needs, and they're either in manufacturing or they're accounting. And so the technologies and the tools that you might need that really take your business to the next level, they're going to be different, not just based on the size of the organization, but just based on what it is that you do. So as we're all sitting here kind of sharing ideas and looking at what's everybody doing and what's the next great thing, it's not necessarily applicable for everybody. So you really have to hone in on it, and this is a good thing, I think. You really have to hone in on what you want to be, what you want your business to look like and be about, and build the technology and select the technology around that, to make sure that your culture, your ambitions for where you're taking the business, that it all works in concert with that. So,
you know, I was going to ask a question about that. Is it okay? Because I know you guys got
Sure.
thoughts. Okay, good, super. So it's a question about the whole thing about adopting technology. You're right, Raj. Not everybody sits in an office to do their work. The office environment requires people to build it. They have to physically be there to do the construction. It requires people to maintain it. They have to physically be there. The building engineers, the janitorial staff, those folks have to be there to do that work. And I have a sense, coming out of the business myself, that a lot of those folks are not as comfortable using technology. They also may not, it's an equity issue. They may not be able to buy a very nice Android phone or an Apple phone that will give them the sort of connectivity that could make use of some of the tools that we're talking about. So I'm left just with the question, how do we as an industry, and how do employers make sure that those folks don't get left behind, are connected in ways that are appropriate, and that they're not continuously reinvesting in more tech. You know, if every time you're hiring a janitor, a janitorial staff person, you need to give them a brand new, you know, $800 iPhone, that could be cost prohibitive in terms of the structure of how you operate your buildings. So I don't really have a question there, actually. That was an observation.
Well, but you had a good point. And the term that is typically used in the IT world is around digital dexterity, which is just another way of saying how comfortable are people in using technologies. And I will say it's probably like of my top 3 concerns about the future, it's definitely in there. And you're right around the equity issue. So in some ways, being remote and having a distributed team is a boost to inclusion, because there's no head of the table on a Zoom call. We're all participating equally. But if you happen to be the person in the facility, or if you don't have access to good Wi-Fi from home, say you live in a rural location, or you don't have access to a good device, there's no question that you're at a significant disadvantage. I think the world's been looking at this in terms of emerging economies for years, and now we're seeing it play out at a microeconomic level within organizations. And so, I would love to think that IT leaders and HR leaders are looking at their workforce and saying, boy, what are we going to do to make sure that people have the tools and the training to succeed? I'm not sure how much it's happening yet. The larger move towards digital transformation was meant to do this in a holistic way, but I think the best evidence suggests that a majority of organizations got caught off guard with how rudimentary their digital transformation programs really were when they were forced to go entirely remote. And this should be top priority, or one of the top priorities.
And the other thing I think about too is that there's the person on the other end, the person who has to be physically on site for whatever the reason is, the installers of furniture, as I said, those people have to be there. How comfortable are they? And then how does an organization set up the management of that? Who is the person who is the coach, the guide, the manager? It says, hey Sally, hey Joe, here's your new thing. It's not just an IT thing, because you're not just teaching them how to turn it on and push some buttons. It's how do you interact with it, and how do we bring you in? You're out there working, when is the time that you can contribute? And a lot of these folks are also hourly workers. So every hour you ask them to work, you have to actually pay them for. Many of us who are on salary, we work until the job is done, and
Right.
our pay remains the same. So there's a whole series of questions I don't think we've even addressed yet, and this is directly related to the cost structure and fundamental operation and construction of the environment we all work in.
Well, I think anytime a business leader who's not in IT sees that the organization is about to adopt a new technology, maybe it's an app or maybe it's Bluebeam or whatever, we should mentally note and then say out loud, great features, tell me about how we're going to train people. Tell me about adoption. Tell me about how we're going to take people from point A to being proficient. And I will personally ask this of my IT counterparts, are you putting as much resources towards the adoption as you are towards the deployment? Because IT people think about deploying things. They don't necessarily think about adopting things. And so all of us have something on our computer that our IT team said we were going to need. For me, it's OneNote. Like, I know some people love that tool. I have yet to crack open that one. So
I'm with you on that, Ryan.
And some people love it, but I think we outside of IT can be the key to saying, hey, listen, if any of my employees or any of the employees of the organization that I'm dependent on are going to need to use this technology and they don't have the resources to buy the hardware, like a personal phone, or they're not being paid to learn how to be proficient at this, organization has to address that. Otherwise, you've wasted the investment in the deployment.
Ryan, I liked your comment about digital dexterity, because I think I see that in our organization. We have development managers who have 20, 30 years of experience, and they are highly skilled, engineering background, architecture background. It's more maybe the engineering background, but if I would make them use Microsoft Teams, I think they'd lose their mind. Whereas I have someone 5 years out of college with a mechanical engineering degree or an architecture degree, and they're all over it. They were the ones that came to me and said, we have to have Bluebeam, we have to have this, we have to, and it's hard to make that transition. And sometimes I use the younger team members to get their more experienced team members kind of integrated, because they just look at it and are like, why am I doing this? I haven't done it like this for 20 years, but now they have to.
It's reverse mentoring, reverse coaching, right?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of that.
It is.
Stephanie, to that point though, there's two other, there is a little bit though, because of this specific experiment, this work from home experiment that we're going through, it's due to the pandemic, there's some flattening of that curve a little bit, that the generations are having to learn this. They may not be able to, they can't teach an old dog new tricks kind of thing. I'm becoming one of the older people too, even though I'm leading technology here.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, there's going to be a little bit of the older generation that's going to be able to learn these things that they normally would not have come near. They almost have to. And the other thing I was going to just add about generationally speaking, you know, this whole workplace design that we've been talking about baby boomers and Gen X and millennials, and Gen Z is coming into this workforce very quickly, and they're going to demand all the speed and efficiency with the things that they've grown up with, you know, and that's going to be another thing that's just going to blow the doors off to continued development on technology.
So I'll give you one slightly different perspective. I think the best research indicates this isn't generational. It's about proficiency and mastery. So there's no generation that's impacted workplace technology as much as baby boomers. The group that got their first StarTech phone, their first BlackBerry, when the iPad came out, it was almost exclusively purchased by people between 40 and 60 for the first year to 2 years. It was $800 and nobody knew what to do with it. And then, you know, CEOs were like, hey, can I get my email on this thing? And IT organizations adopted bring your own device. They wouldn't have done it for the 22-year-old at college being like, I'd like to use this random thing. And so I think the issue is, Stephanie, you've got colleagues that are very proficient. They've mastered a process. And when you say, well, they wouldn't want to use Microsoft Teams, if I were in that role, I'd be like, geez, I'm so good at this and we're using it. It feels like that could potentially set back the business or set back my productivity. Whereas somebody who's younger, they may have proficiency in something like the Google Suite or Snapchat, or if you look outside of North America, WhatsApp is like primary productivity tool in Latin America. So I think the key challenge to any sort of dexterity strategy is to say, you don't have to stop what you're doing and stop being productive. We'll let you gradually build towards something else, but there is kind of this baton pass that's going to happen over time. And I personally, whenever I'm with maybe older employees in the organization, remind them that, hey, we learned how to use all these tools because of all the new technologies they brought into business. And all of us have to maintain a certain degree of agility to pick up something new. But boy, if somebody told me today to stop using what I was using to be productive and start using something else, I'd push back really hard too. And I got digital innovation in my title.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I can go on about the generation thing for ages, but
Thanks. Yeah.
I have found some real Luddites in their mid-20s over the years.
Well, no, that's true. That's true, Ryan. No doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt.
All right, thanks.
Well, great conversation, everyone. You know, definitely want to open up to see if there's any additional questions. The nice thing about a small group is you kind of get a little more intimacy and can have open dialogue. So
Sure. And Stephanie had to jump off. She was late for another call, but wanted to hang on for as long as she could. So, and we're scheduled to end at 10:15. So yeah, so we're just about at the end anyway. Winona, anything you want to jump in with, or Lisa?
Sure, I will. One of our challenges and concerns, and something that I've read about, and you know, we're doing the best we can. Younger staff that needs mentorship. You know, we're an engineering firm, so you know you can't sit on technology all day and share screens and shadow, and you know, so that's been a little bit difficult. Onboarding, you know, new staff and teaching them. You know, you're not sitting at a conference room table teaching them how GPI does things, you know, our standards, you know, those kinds of things. You have to use technology to communicate all of that. It gets tedious, and it's really a lot of time spent. I don't know if anybody has any input or has experienced anything like that, but, you know, we're worried about keeping those younger people that are hungry and want to learn engaged, because this wears you out.
As some tangible answers. We've done the same thing. We had a team, we don't have a big team, but we had 4 members that were pretty new. We've broken up their learning into bite-sized chunks of 15 minutes twice a week in the mornings before another meeting. So if you want to join, join. If you don't want to join, don't. We found that everybody signs up to join of these learning sessions. And what it does is it makes it really easy for them to, we also record them, easy for them to engage. It's totally voluntary. If you want to come, come. If you want to have conversation about it, parking lot, and then talk about it afterwards. But it's, the biggest part of it is it's intentional, and it has a very specific cadence. And so twice a week is only 15 minutes, but it's devoted to helping the rest of the team learn something. And then that carries over for the next few days of, oh, I thought about this, or did you think about that? And so that twice a week gives us enough time in between to think a little bit beforehand. Like we post all of the learning titles that you'll be looking at for the next 3 months on our Teams chat. And then you can go through the Teams channel and see all of the different comments, or you can watch the videos because they're all recorded. But I think it's that intentionalness and the cadence of really saying learning is something we're going to put forward and keep on the schedule. And it's also really helped our culture as well. It's helped people just say, hey, I have a question about that thing we talked about 2 days ago. That's been really helpful for us.
That's helpful. Thank you for that. You know, we have scheduled meetings, and there is that, but I love the idea of what you said, you know, 3 months out, kind of knowing what your subjects are that you're going to cover. That's a great idea and something I can use. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I'll just add, if you are fortunate to have these team members within a specific geography, like the greater DC area, and they have vehicles, I still would consider an outdoor get-together, right? Physical distancing outdoors, 8 feet apart, is not odd at all. I think there's been almost no documented cases of COVID-19 spread outdoors globally. The trouble is like getting on a train to get to an office space. I know it's weird, but I'd pick a park or some outdoor location, spend a couple hours. Just those moments are almost impossible to recreate visually. It's why those remote companies still get people together. And if it's really not possible, then I know this is going to sound super old school, but I pick up the phone. And I will admit, some people are like, why are you calling me? But I'm like, well, because I don't have any reason to schedule an hour video call, and we would just fill the time, as you can tell. I'm inclined to do that. But I just want to see what's going on with you. So like my closest colleague in the company is somebody I've worked with for years. We call each other like spontaneously once every other day. It's just, I don't have any reason to put a meeting on your calendar, but I do have a reason to see what's going on with you. And sometimes we talk about our family, and other times we talk about work, but I still think of the phone as a pretty good tool for this sort of thing.
Well, and Winona, you know, we've known each other from our past life. I mean, I would say that, you know, if you connected with Leslie's probably running into similar issues there at DVI. It's that same, you almost have to look at what worked well before this. How did that work well? Why did it work well? And how do you keep that part of your onboarding and training, you know, those processes alive, regardless of the medium, whether it's virtual or physical? Because I think it's probably shining a light a little bit on maybe some things that probably didn't work well even in the past. I mean, even pre-pandemic, back while I was over there at DVI, we had compiled, I mean, we knew that that was an area where we had to improve on, about not just plop somebody down, here's your email address and here's Revit, and kind of go at it, here's the project, and there's certain standards and processes and ways and a certain way of how we work, that group worked together, that we packaged up into something that was sort of homework, and they had to check off that they've gone through the training and gone through the program and know what the process is. So,
hey, you all, as I warned a few of you who were on early with me, the electrician has finally arrived. So I'm going to say thank you one more time and leave you to it. Keep talking for as long as you want. There's no time deadline on the Zoom call. I'm going to mute myself and turn off the camera, and thank you again.
See you, Kathy. Thank you.
thank you, Kathy.
Thank you.
What do you think, Christina?
Any other questions?
You need
or
more of Ryan and Raj?
We could go on for hours, but you know, I think if there's additional questions, we love to carry on conversations. I'll probably reach out to you and just introduce myself personally, and very nice to meet everybody on this phone call.
Yep, and don't hesitate to connect on LinkedIn. I mean, if you're interested in this topic, I'll bore you to heck with weekly posts.
Well, and Winona, we've got probably other conversations we can have being roommates. You know, the fact that we're both in the same building over there.
I know, isn't that great?
Yeah, that's
great.
kind of interesting. We've had, you know, continuous conversations about when and how that's going to play out. But yeah, stay in touch. Connect with me through LinkedIn. I think I've got your contact information. Lisa, it's great to see you again. Yeah, hopefully you got a little nugget or two there.
Great.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you all for doing this.
Christina, I'll be
Bye-bye.
reaching out to you.
Bye.
Thank you.